Rob here, and to this video we're going to be analysing the front cover of the July 1965 issue of Vogue. Now, what are the different elements of a magazine front cover called? The name of the magazine here, this is the masthead. M-A-S-T-H-E-A-D. Masthead. Okay? Pictures, they're referred to as art. This stuff down here, this text, any text in the magazine is called copy. But in particular, these are called cover lines. These are on the front cover and they tell you what's in the magazine. They're there to entice the reader into reading the magazine. Now, we need to consider theories, right? So, we need to be doing a semiotic analysis of this front cover. That means we need to be considering semiotics by Roland Barthes. So, we look at the idea that texts communicate meaning through a process of signification. We need to consider the way in which these signs function at the level of denotation, in other words, what we can literally see, and connotation, in other words, the meanings of what we can see that are encoded into it by the people who've made it, by the producer, right? So what are the meanings associated with those signs and how those signs, through repetition, right? So through constant being reinforcing that message, okay? Cultivation theory, George Gerbner, remember, right? They become what Roland Barthes called myth. In other words, we don't question these ideas, we take them for granted. Okay? We also need to be considering genre theory by Steve Neal. So what is the genre that Vogue fills into? Vogue is a lifestyle magazine. Lifestyle magazines are essentially a kind of instruction manual. They give you a lifestyle that depicts an ideal self, a role model that we aspire to, what they call an aspirational role model. So remember, the concept of ideal self came from Carl Rogers. All right. Now, we can extrapolate from that. There's such a thing as an ideal self. There can also be an ideal partner. Okay. So we need to be considering what is the ideal self that is being shown in this lifestyle magazine. The subgenre of this magazine is it is a woman's fashion magazine. Right? That is the subgenre of the woman's lifestyle magazine. Of course, there are also men's lifestyle magazines like Esquire and GQ. Okay? Now, we also need to be considering the institutional economic context of this. So, why genres? Because they make it easier to sell the magazine because you're fitting it to one specific audience. And you have subgenres so that you can separate it from your competitors. We also need to consider binary opposites, Structuralism by Claude Levi-Strauss. That there are binary opposites inherent in things. Now, even if you don't have two things in this, there is a representation, but there's also a counter-representation or an opposite representation. It may not be represented there, but it's implied by its absence. So not only do we need to consider what is being represented, we need to consider what is not being represented. Right? So, other things with Stuart Hall, theories of representation. That, as you know, Barthes would say, representation comes through signs. There is certain language being used here to depict in things and to communicate meanings to the audience. What are those signs? What are the codes that govern those signs? What stereotypes are being shown here? Alton Lipman came up with the term stereotyping, remember. What is being stereotyped? Who is being stereotyped? How are they being stereotyped? And remember, stereotyping occurs when there are inequalities of power. Remember that Vogue exists in a state where it is in a world of, patriarchal male power. This is, I wouldn't go so far as to say pre-feminism, but feminism was really only in its second stage at this point. We were seeing the beginnings of modern feminism if we understand it. If you assume the first era of feminism was in the turn of the 19th century and the early 20th century in the fight for women's suffrage. This is second wave feminism, where people started to look at inequality between men and women and how women were seen as, second class citizens. Okay, so in what ways were women second-class citizens? Right? How do women exist in this world of patriarchy? Right? We also need to consider this idea of who is subordinate and who is excluded. So women would very much in a patriarchy be seen as a subordinate group. But who is excluded? Well, the other, that which is not the dominant like parent culture. So what we can see here is that you will, throughout this magazine, it portrays perfection as being very much white, okay? White Caucasian. That people of colour are only in this magazine as servants to white people, okay? When I looked at the introduction to Vogue in the other magazine video I did, you will notice that the current editorial team of Vogue, British Vogue, has 2 black people as their editor-in-chief and chief fashion director. That is a definite attempt to address the perceived ethnocentrism of women's lifestyle and fashion magazines up to this point. It's something they've always been criticised for, is their lack of representations of people of colour in these magazines. Alright? We'll get onto that in a minute. Obviously we need to consider, David Gauntlet. What are the tools that this magazine is giving us to construct identities? Well, that's where the advertising comes in and the actual editorial as well. The articles are telling us how to achieve feminine perfection, but so are the adverts. The adverts are there trying to sell us a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle you achieve through the consumption of consumer goods, fashion items in this case, whether it be clothes or shoes or cosmetics or, tanning products or even holidays. All right, we need to consider that and how it's only a very straightforward singular message because it's the 1960s. This is very different to the modern 21st century, woke, post Black Lives Matter, post, Me Too movement, okay? None of that stuff happens for another half century. So this is all against the backdrop of patriarchal, white, dominant culture. Remember in 1965, Britain still had an empire. It was falling apart and it was disappearing bit by bit, but we still had the empire and we still have very close ties with those ex-imperial countries that now part and still are part of our Commonwealth. We also need to consider feminist theory. So we need to look at the representation of women. Okay? Lisbeth van Zoenen is the key one to look at here because we need to look at the way in which women's bodies are displayed as objects to be consumed as part of a core element of Western patriarchal society. We need to consider the representation of women within its cultural and historical context. As I said, this is the very beginnings of second wave feminism. So women were still very much seen as second-class citizens within a white patriarchal culture. Okay? And what are the visual and narrative codes that are used to construct the female body as an object of spectacle? Okay? How are women being objectified? How are they being sexualized? Alright? And in terms of binary opposites, if we consider what is not being represented, we can also bring Bell Hooks into this. And her idea that the fact that it's not just race and social class that objectifies women or exploits them and discriminates them, but also race. Okay? Now, as we said, the only people of colour we'll be represented in the pages we're going to look at are servants, male servants at that. Okay? Female people of colour are notable in their absence. Having said that, if we look at this picture of Sophia Loren, the famous 1950s and 1960s actress, we can consider this in terms of Paul Gilroy's post-colonial theory, the way in which binary opposites of otherness are established, in which people who are not white, people of colour, are seen as being othered. Now, the other can be something to be scared of, but there's also racist, he would argue, in the way that which we exoticize and eroticize the other. Something can be exciting because it's different, because it's novel. Here we've got Sophia Loren in a publicity photograph of the film Lady L, in which she is dressed as a Turkish dancer. Sophia Loren herself is Italian, so she is Mediterranean. Now that does make her white, but in a society where, you know, it wasn't just people of colour who were looked down upon as second-class citizens, people who weren't white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, Northern European, North American white were also seen as being inferior. Remember, there was still a lot of anti-Semitism here. There was a lot of racism towards people, Southern Mediterraneans, whether they be Greek or Italian or Spanish. They were seen as being inferior, as were people like the Irish, for example. They also received an awful lot of racism, right? So, what this magazine is doing is it's depicting Sophia Loren as an ideal self, as an aspirational role model, as the epitome of beauty for women, all right? With her symmetrical features and her perfect lips and her perfect nose and her perfect eyes and her perfect skin. It's objectifying her by focusing on her face and her beauty, not her as a person. She's not on the front cover of Vogue because she's a great actress, although she was. She's on the front cover of Vogue because of her beauty. And because her beauty was exotic, all right? It was, you know, different from a British beauty or an American beauty or a French beauty. It had that Mediterranean exoticness. She had very much a curvy hourglass kind of figure, which was very different to the kinds of, you know, models that were coming out of Britain at the time, like Twiggy and, you know, Jean Shrimpton, who was stick thin, almost boyish in their beauty. You know, flat-chested, narrow-hipped. That's very, very skinny kind of look that was coming out of London at the time. She represented a voluptuous Latin lover kind of eroticism. But it's also exoticizing the Near East. You know, Turkey is a country that has part of itself in Europe and part of it in Asia. Okay? Africa. It is that exoticization of what is foreign, which is seen here in her. You know, look at the slanted eyeliner and her mascara and stuff that's making her look, you know, she's got these sort of like slanted eyes that don't look very Northern European, okay? The full lips, for example. Also here we've got this turban she's wearing. Now, in today's day and age, we would call this cultural appropriation. It would be considered racist, but in those days it was perfectly acceptable, okay? It's, from a Paul Gilroy point of view, it's exoticizing the other. Right, and she of course is playing dress up, okay. But again, look at the jewels, look at the, you know, the emeralds and the diamonds. It's suggesting, and the pearls. It's suggesting high culture, high fashion. It's parties, it's wealth, it's beautiful women. Okay, it's that high class, high status. So the artwork is depicting a certain ideal self. As we said, look at the masthead. What does the word Vogue mean? As we said, Vogue means what is in fashion, what is in style at that particular time. It's a French word. France is very much associated with fashion. Another word we'd use is chic, for example, another French word meaning stylish. Okay? So, the word Vogue, en vogue, means in fashion, right? The connotations. What is not just what is denoted, but what is connoted, remember. Right, this colour, this sort of like forest emerald green, it reflects the colour of the jewels, therefore connotes wealth and value and status, although it doesn't stand out very well against this turquoise turban, which makes it a very odd choice. The font is a serif font. These things up here, these are serifs, right? Serif fonts connote elegance and sophistication. You may have been taught at level 2 that serif fonts are considered a feminine font. Don't see it myself, never understood that, but that's something you could say. Here we've got the date line, July 1965. It's a convention in the fashion industry, magazine, or the magazine industry, I should say, like that, you know, the July issue would come out a month ahead. So this would actually be in shelves and newsagents in June, not July. It costs 3 shillings. Now this is pre-decimalisation of the British currency, so we still had imperial money. Money came in pounds, shillings and pence. Okay, it's difficult to establish how much 3 shillings is in 2020 money, but it depends how you look at it. The labour value of that commodity is £5.40 in today's money, 3 shillings. The income value of that commodity is £7.1. The economic share is £8.58. Don't know what any of that means, if I'm perfectly honest. But £5.40 to £7.1 is not massively far off what the modern equivalent of Vogue costs today. Although, of course, with the magazine industry in decline, the magazine's getting cheaper. You'll also find that the July 1965 issue of Vogue had far less advertising in it and far fewer adverts than the contemporary one does. And as we said, Vogue today gets most of its profit from its advertising, not its cover price. All right. Remember, the circulation of Vogue even today is readership is 4 times what its circulation was. Not quite sure what the circulation of Vogue was in those days, but it would have been, again, pretty good. Target audience for this magazine, very much AB, right? Middle class, upper class, bourgeois, okay? Look what this cover lines say. Marvellous mad midsummer, bit of alliteration going on. Sand, swim, sea, sun, sheiks, Sophia, and how to scintillate almost anywhere. Right, they've got a page number telling you where I found this information. It's called a turn. Let's get you to turn the page, right? Now, this is suggesting that it's about leisure. So, very Dionysian in that respect. It's all about living for pleasure, right? It's also suggesting this idea that sand, swimming, sea and sun, this is something you get abroad. It's not suggesting you go to Brighton or Blackpool, right? This is the beginnings of the international jet set, as they called it. The introduction of the jet engine and the commercial jet airliner, like the Havilland Comet and the Boeing 707, which were coming into service about this time, meant for the first time that air travel was becoming, and international travel therefore, was becoming cheaper, faster, and more accessible to the bourgeois, to the middle classes. Okay? Until then, international travel would have required a very long time on a ship, right? Taking weeks to get, or even days to get abroad. Okay? Now it can be done in hours, in comfort and speed, right? Still expensive. You know, you had to be wealthy to be able to fly abroad, but it was now possible. So again, the exoticization of the foreign, the international. Right, that pretty much covers the analysis of the front cover. If you've got any more questions, you know where to find me. Subsequent videos will look at the other pages. Next one up, contents page.